Welcome to the concept of the no input mixer. This app from Igor Vasiliev simulates a traditional audio amplifier with preamp, effects loop and output stages. Now conventionally an input is fed to the preamp, which amplifies it to line level and adds filtering and EQ, then optionally passes through some effects into a power amp to output to speakers. Now in this case we don't have an input, but the output of the preamp is connected back to its own input instead. So this creates a positive feedback loop, and all the tiny electronic noise artifacts and glitches get amplified, generally producing that fairly recognizable runaway screeching sound. Something like that. But if we finesse that feedback by tweaking the preamp settings, we'll discover a whole complex world of structure. So let's have a look at the app. I think this is the most useful opening view because it shows we have not one but 7 independent preamps and 1 output stage. That's this over here on the right. These are numbered 1 to 7. That looks like a 0 on the output stage, but that's an O, I believe. So we've got 7 independent preamps. That's why it's called a mixer, obviously. So we've got individual level sliders on each channel and a bunch of other controls. I'm going to say channel and preamp interchangeably, by the way, so they're not separate things in case you get confused. These numbers, by the way, don't appear by default. You have to go to the app settings and toggle that option on. You see you've disappeared there. Go back. It's helpful to have those on. So this shows all the channels together like a regular mixer. But if we click on this tab up here at the top right where it says multi, it toggles us into an expanded view that shows a single channel and the output stage side by side. Now this isn't very clear. The output stage is these 3 columns on the right hand side, and the preamp settings for this channel are the 4 columns on the left. It probably would have helped if these were different colours or something, although we do have these labels, so the channel number there and the O for output there. We can still change the channel we're looking at by clicking on these channel selectors at the left hand side. We also have the level sliders there as well, just as an extra. So this screen shows everything we can tweak for any given preamp. I'll just quickly zip through these settings for now and point them out. First we choose the input. This is confusing. Input selector. Now of course we've said we don't have any inputs per se. What this actually does is we're choosing where to pick up the output of the preamp to then feed back to its input. And there's various different places we can pick it up. So this is Igor's block diagram from the help page. If I just show it to you in the help page actually. If you scroll down, there it is. It's also, there's a PDF file of this help page somewhere, which you can get as well. And you can look at that, study that. You probably should study that block diagram. Keep going back to it as you get familiar with the app to get a grasp of the subtleties of the routing. The routing is potentially very complex in this app, but it's also very key to getting complicated and interesting effects. So back to choosing the input. I'm just going to choose this one that says ins pre for now. I'll explain that in a little while. So we have a level control for the selected preamp here, and we can also pan it left to right there. And if I just leave this running with it generating a little bit of sound, so it's not too overpowering. We've also got a gain control for the input. That allows us to overdrive the input. And that, you can see that already gives us some variation in the sounds that we get out of there. We've got a noise control that lets us inject our own noise as well. Again, and changing the quality of the output sound, you can select what kind of noise you inject in there as well. And you can see each of these has its own texture. It's quite an interesting one. We've got 2 knobs here labelled limit, so it's limiter and overprotection circuit. I'm not going to explain what these are in any detail. Your Google's as good as mine. but you can just treat them as tweaks really and see how they affect the sound. So you can see in your backup having some effect. You can read about these in the help file manual. Now, Igor does come in for a bit of flack with his manuals, so I will continue to point out that he actually writes manuals. Many of these app producers don't. As you get up to speed, you'll find that as you go back and read that over and over again, you will find that the detail becomes a little bit more clear. So it's a good reference, is what I'm saying. So limit and overprotection, you can just treat those as tweaks. They do something, you'll figure out what they do. Likewise, these rather anonymous selectors here and here, this is, I understand, the type of vacuum tube that the amp is based on, and this is the particular amplifier circuit or integrated circuit, which presumably each of these brings its own quality of noise artifacts to the mix and therefore affects the quality of the sounds that we might discover. So we've got filter and EQ controls here. These are relatively conventional. I'm not sure what a shelf filter is, but if you go click that, you've got high and low cutoff. They behave pretty much as you would expect. So if you put the high cut to all the way left, low cut all the way right, you're not filtering anything out. That's a low pass filter, high pass filter. That's what those things do. And that filter and EQ, by the way, is just to remind you, is for the output of the preamp stage. You notice that over here on the output, this is the final output right before we push it out to the speakers, if you like. We've got similar EQ and filter controls. We've also got a reverb over there and a sort of master level control. I'm going to skip these last three controls under the banners of send and EFX for now. Come back to them in a little while. And likewise on the output, we've got three similar controls labelled rather enigmatically return rather than send and EFX. Now if we flip back to the mixer page, so remember we're looking at one preamp here, we're looking at all of them together here. All that information we've just looked at for each channel is available from this screen as well. You just have to dig for it. So if you click on the column heading, you can see the missing amp settings. So we've got the tube type, the amplifier circuit type, we've got the noise, gain, limit, overprotection. We can get the EQ settings by clicking the EQ button. So it's all available from here. Now there's a third display we haven't seen yet, which we can get to by clicking where it says mixer up here at the top right. And this toggles from the mixer to a 8-slot effects rack, and we can also get that from the single channel display by clicking in the same place. It's a different word there, unfortunately. That's not particularly intuitive. Now you'll notice that effects rack is kind of parallel to the mixer rack, and it is set up by default so that it's convenient to apply a single inline effect, what's traditionally called, I think, an insert effect, to each channel. So if you look at FX1 here, that purple slider labelled presence actually appears on the detailed channel page for channel 1. Here it's this, looks different, it's a dial here, but you see it's set about halfway there. If we go back to there, it's about halfway. If we put it all the way to the top, it's now maxed out on the detailed channel display. So it's the same control. So it kind of looks like that effect 1 is hardwired into channel 1, and you can use it that way, but it's not actually strictly correct. We can route that effect, or you make use of that effect in different ways. You'll notice, by the way, there are 8 effects and only 7 channels. So number 8 is applied to the output, which is why on the output screen here it says EFX8, and that presence slider we should find has tweaked slider number 8 on the effects rack. Okay, let's get on and make some sound just to make sure we reset everything. We'll go to the presets, we'll go to init and set. I think we're already there. So we'll focus on a single channel for now. Just to emphasize that, we'll mute all the other ones And for input, we're going to choose ins pre. Now, what does that mean? Let's go to the detailed view. Ins pre is it's basically the simplest feedback loop we can do. It's taking the preamp output at the first opportunity, notionally, before we would have any insert effect. That's why the INS. So even if we had this effect set up for that channel, the feedback loop doesn't include whatever that effect does to the signal. So we already will get some feedback. If I bring up the level slider, and initially we get that fairly obnoxious screech. If we push it further, something starts to break down and then self-oscillate, and we get more complexity. As we can hand it left to right. And of course we get transient changes depending on how quickly we move that slider. And sometimes if we let go and let it settle, it will change. That's fairly stable. So that's fairly boring, but we can do things already to make it more interesting. If we bump up the gain and overdrive that input, essentially, again we get that breakdown effect pretty quickly. And the interaction between just these two sliders is already quite complex. We start even further. It's not particularly make it interesting, but it's doing something. If we bump up the noise all the way, it seems to have stopped there, but it's mixing that noise in some sense with whatever is being fed to the input. And then we can change these limit and over protection sliders. If we change the noise to a different kind of noise, what you'll find is actually, generally speaking, the type of noise changes the kind of tone of the output. This Geiger noise introduces some, I'm not really sure, some sort of random noise, I suppose. It's introducing some emergent. So you see again that kind of fairly unpredictable stuff here, which is quite helpful. One of the slight, it's not really a criticism, but one of the things that it would have been nice to have would be automation of some of these sliders to move them up and down gradually. You can do that by going into the app settings and MIDI. Everything's MIDI mappable. I might do that towards the end just so we can kind of look at it. So, what else can we do to change that tone? We can change the tune type. That might have done something there, I'm not sure. Amplifier type. Oh, sorry, that's amplifier mode. It's another one of these. You have to Google what that means. Tube. It's the linear or saturated mode of the amplifier, whatever that means. The filtering, again, high pass and low pass. I found that setting this filter to notch or to pass is actually gives some quite interesting results. Again, if you could animate that slider with an LFO, that would be kind of more dynamic. It's still a little bit dull at the moment. Let's look at how we can spice that up by adding an insert effect to this channel 1. And we do that by going to the mixer channel. Although this is kind of hardwired in by default, you have to go here to the effect slot for effect number 1. You've got to tweak the routing with these two buttons here. So the input wants to come from channel 1 as an insert effect. Ins. Take my word for it, that's what you need to select. Output, we don't have to select any output, and the output of this goes straight into the general mix and out the other end. I'll try and keep it low so we can kind of hear it as we tweak. Choose a type of effect. So we'll choose the one that's going to be easy to spot. Flanging is quite easy to spot. We'll put the depth up to maximum, rate to minimum, so it'll be very slow flanging, and we have to put the presence slider at non-zero. Put it all the way up. Well, something's happening. It's not particularly flange worthy, but let's try. Any flanging wasn't the best one to choose. Let's change that to chorus. Yeah, we can hear that's doing something. Tremolo, boring. Hit crush. That's very familiar to users of Igor's other apps. Yeah, we don't have to have it overpowering. We've got a, this is wet and dry, if you like. We've got a delay. Yeah, it's quite good as well. Now what we've done there is we've added the effects, but the effect is not being part of the feedback loop. So what's happening is the feedback is happening in the boring way, as we looked at earlier, but the effect is being then stuck on the end as it heads out to the downstream processing, let's say. And it's already added a little bit of interest, but what's really interesting is if we change where we pick up that output signal to feedback, we can pick it up after the insert effect, which is this ins post. So if I let it run, and then you can hear the difference as I switch over to that. Something changed there, and now we'll find that if we play with these other controls, we're getting different, qualitatively very different kind of effects. We're going to change the kind of effect we've got on there again. Let's put the flanging on again. So that's the simple way to add an effect, an insert effect to a single channel. Now then, what if you wanted to add multiple effects to that channel? You can do it. So let's look at how to add multiple effects in parallel. So at the moment, what have we got? We've got a chorus effect on there. Let's say we want to use EFX slot 2. Instead of using it as an insert effect for channel 2, we want to use it as a parallel, I guess, effect for channel 1. How do we do that? Now it's a little bit more complicated to do that. We have to use these other controls labeled send and return. Now this terminology is, if you're not familiar with the world of amplifiers and mixers, which I wasn't, this is kind of confusing, but you can Google this and figure out what's happening. Basically, as I understand it, you have this idea of a send and return loop, if you like. Now the idea is you send a signal out and that goes to an effect, and then it returns into the amplifier circuitry, if you like, by a return part of the send return loop. I think that's the right kind of terminology. So how do we do it? What do we do? Let's see. We want to send that signal out into the ether where it can be hooked up to an effect. Now to send it out, we tweak we've got two different send effect loops which are independent. So we'll use send one for now. So we can tweak it here, or in the multiple display we've got it at the top. So we'll send 100% of whatever's happening on that preamp output onto the send return loop 1. We go to the effect. For now, for effect 1, which is currently the chorus effect, we're going to change it from being an insert effect to an insert effect on send loop 1. So the input is send loop 1. The output now, I don't think it works if you leave the output at none. You have to select the sort of complementary part of that send return loop, which is return 1. So it comes in on send 1, goes out on return 1, and then bump that up. So we'll just play that. We should hear that. It should sound more or less the same as what we had when it was an insert effect. Famous last words. to be doing anything at all. Right, okay. The missing step there. Okay, so that effect is now happening way downstream. If you look at the block diagram again, that effect is happening downstream of where we're picking up the output of the preamp that's generating the feedback loop. I hope that makes sense. It makes sense in my head. What we need to do is change where we pick up the output from to be the output of that send return loop. And then hopefully we get that effect mixed back into the feedback loops. Yeah, so that now responds to the presence slider. Let's try a different effect. Alright, the bit crush one is much more obvious. It's more obvious now that is being fed into the feedback loop. So that's the first effect. We're looking to put in two parallel effects here, don't forget. So let's see, for effect 2, we do the same thing with the routing. So we take the input from send 1 and we'll send the output to return 1. We could use the second send return loop for this, but we won't do that. Let's temporarily bypass that first effect so we can hear the impact of the second one. Well, we'll leave it that forward filter. So if we unbypass the other one, we should get the bit crush back in as well. Right, that's the bit crush. Lost the forming effect. Put it both together. Let's change that to be something else. Alright, so we've got two effects at once in parallel. Let's turn on to reverb actually. Put you turn to bed while you. Now, there is a way to add two effects in, or more than two, in series. If you want to do that, go back to, we'll set up that first one as an insert effect again, picking it up post insert. So the effect is mixed into the feedback loop. So we have to go back to the EFX1, we have to change the routing. So in is insert effect, out is none, so it goes to the mix bus. We go to EFX2. Now, instead of taking it from send one, we have to, by the way, yeah, that send parameter doesn't have any meaning. So, second effect, routing, there is an option there which is input from previous effect. So it's going to pick up the output from effect 1 as the input to this. The output of this, again, I don't think this goes to the general mix. Let's try that. If we put none, I think we have to set that to return 1, but we'll try it. So we've got that first effect, which is a bit crush. That should go into the flanger. Doesn't seem to be affecting the output. Bypass that first one. So actually maybe that routing you do have to choose return 1, and then we have to pick up the feedback from the return bus rather than from immediately after the insert effect. Yeah. So that's definitely showing the flanging, which is chained on the end of the bit crush, which is currently bypassed, but if we put that on, bit crushing, then it's flanging. That's quite nice actually. So really, the essence of what makes this app complex, complicated, is right there. It's that routing of, if I'm just saying all this, but unless you've got that block diagram in front of you and looking at the different points where the output from the preamp is picked up to feed back to its input, it's really hard to keep it all in your head. I mean, there is an argument for just pushing the buttons and tweaking, but it does help if you've got some rudimentary understanding of things like the routing. I won't go much further. I mean, obviously, you can set all this up on more than one channel, and particularly with this send and return routing, what isn't perhaps obvious is when you send out your signal on send one, it's called a bus. Igor calls it a bus, send one bus. And then if you did that from another channel, those go to the same bus. So those get mixed together. And then if you got effects on that send return loop, those effects both get applied to that mixed stream. So already the complexity has gone up probably exponentially just by adding those two channels together. And if you add further channels, I mean, the potential for unpredictability is massively multiplied at each step. So that's the beauty of this, really. But I'm not going to set up more than one channel. What I am going to do is I'm just going to show you two other things which are slightly interesting that we set up in AUM. And so it's nice to just pipe the output of this into somebody else. And I've got Other Desert Cities loaded just because it's a nice sort of demented delay effect. Like that, you leave that running, just go back in and tweak. And the last thing I'm going to do, just because I mentioned it earlier, I've got MIDI LFOs loaded here. I've got one LFO set up just to control, I think it's that filter slider. If I just kick that in, I put it on a sine on a fairly, it's unrealistically fast LFO there. Let's slow it down a bit. You can see that's having some dynamism. Interesting to put that on a sample and hold. So it kind of randomizes the position of that slider over time. And of course you could animate all these other sliders and controls as well. That's just one simple animation. And there it is. So that's quick orientation with the no input mixer from Igor Vasiliev. Hopefully you found that interesting, maybe even educational. So keep on tweaking and be interesting to see what people come up with.